presented here for your consideration the notion that the ordinary people surrounding you every day, on the street, the bus, at the post office, or the trendy evening venue, are, in fact, far from ordinary. That these men, women, and others form their own splinter groups behind closed doors, and that these micro-societies engage in activities often more obscure than fiction. Welcome to the Sub-Subculture.
Yes, hello, and thank you for joining us on the Sub-Subculture Podcast. I am your host and a direct living descendant of Kermit the Frog, Andrew.
Wow. Very distant. And I'm Joe, the illegitimate love child of Marty McFly and your mum.
Great. Good. We've gone in on the lineage nicely here. At least yours are human.
Depends whose mum.
That's true. This is for all you barnyard animals out there.
Strong listener base.
So, today we are talking about drag queens.
Yes, queen. Yes, slay.
I knew one of us was going to make those sounds, and I didn't think it was going to be me, and I was right.
I just got to get out of the way.
Do you? Those are RuPaulisms, though, right?
I think so, yeah. So this is a fun topic, but I have to say up front, I'm probably going to butcher some of the language. I'm probably going to butcher some of the important concepts around gay heritage. I don't mean any harm. I'm trying my best. It's just a lot to take in.
It's not hate speech, I promise.
Yeah. I'm going to try to not get cancelled.
Okay. So drag queens, a deliberately provocative and shocking subculture that might actually be doing damage to feminism and even its own roots in the gay community from its modern time in the spotlight.
Or...
No or.
You usually add or an upside.
I said it might be.
Oh, it might be. Or it's a fabulous expression of gender identity freedom. How about that?
Sure. Oh, it's hard. Okay, so you've done your disclaimer.
Yeah.
Mine goes into my preconceptions. My disclaimer is I don't like this personally, and I think I find it repellent, right? And as the objective and fair public broadcaster that I am, I think it's fine to acknowledge that and to state it for the record before starting, whilst trying to give a balanced opinion and possibly even argue to change my own mind. But I went into this going, I'm not looking forward to this and I don't like it.
Did you not like it already, or did you not like it after doing some research?
I went into it not liking the idea of it.
Interesting. So what is your preconception then?
So I associate it with very tacky, over the top, I would say camp behavior. I wouldn't say gay behavior. I say camp behavior because they're different. And it's not actually cross-dressing or anything to do with trans or LGBTQ+. But it's, I thought it was just men acting performatively outrageous and in a kind of mockery of women and feminism. So they've got over-the-top glittery outfits, heels, makeup, hair, that kind of thing. The likes of Dame Edna or Lily Savage that we might have seen, staples of old school British broadcasting, I guess, and maybe some of the more recent competitors on reality shows like MasterChef, which I watch, where people from that sphere have come into the limelight as celebrities and are therefore competing. And I think part of what I dislike is the outrageous behavior that nowadays it's frowned upon to call out as not being okay, and it's being inappropriate because they can somehow hide behind this kind of the rainbow flag as a protective shield. And God forbid anyone have a reasonable discourse on their opinion to say, hey, I don't like this thing. Instead, you, or rather I, would just be labeled as something phobic and have our opinions dismissed as hate speech. So that was kind of all wrapped up in my feelings about this going into starting to look at it.
So what outrageous behavior in particular, have you got an example that you can give?
I think when I've seen this on shows that I do watch, it's overacting and playing up to the, oh, you're a sexy man, aren't you, kind of thing. Or just acting in a way that a natural woman wouldn't act or wouldn't be thought of as appropriate. I don't know, touching a male presenter's bum and going, oh, saucy, or something like that. That's all part of the attitude.
And what don't you like about it?
I find it rude and abhorrent.
Rude and abhorrent. Would you give it any slack because it's part of a performance rather than just... Drag queens are usually performing, right?
it's absolutely a performative art form. And should I therefore accept bad behavior because it's a performance? If I put on an oversized football shirt and go out and punch someone in the face and piss on them on the floor and then go, oh, I was just acting like a football hooligan, does that make what I'm doing any less incorrect?
It probably makes it okay if you advertised that and they bought tickets to your show and said, please knock me out and piss on me. That's what I've come here for. And you oblige them.
And there's, we'll get into this a bit later because it's wrapped up in a couple of other things that people say, okay, we have to accept drag queen performance, whereas other things that are on a par in terms of the mockery, we absolutely don't put up with. But I've got an article about that a bit later. What are your preconceptions? What did you think going into this to start with?
So I had a vague idea of drag queens in the popular culture. People like Eddie Izzard, who maybe aren't technically a drag queen. I think he was considered a transvestite, but I kind of put that, I don't even know if transvestite's the right term anymore, but in the 90s, that was the term that he used, I believe. Anyway, I'd kind of equated them as sort of gender play, gender bending. Can we say gender bending? I think that's okay. No, it's not okay. Okay, gender play.
7 minutes in, cancelled.
Oh, we're already super cancelled, but never mind. And yeah, that was a loose idea I had. And then RuPaul's Drag Race came around in 2009, and it slowly seeped into my
wank fantasies
version of the public consciousness and wank fantasies. Yes, thank you. That's the great thing. They don't have to be fantasies. You can just watch the show. More difficult to hire them, though. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I was interested in RuPaul's Drag Race, mostly because I have no fucking clue what this is about. It is completely inscrutable to me, or it was completely inscrutable to me. Why do people want to do this? What do they get out of it? And who goes to see it? And why? So it's totally bizarre to me. Why are men dressing as women? Is it to be singers or dancers or entertainers? They're all gay, right? There's something else that I thought, which I think has turned out to be largely true. Are they trans? Or are they just effeminate gay men? Or is it something to do with wanting to be a woman? These are the kind of questions that I had going through my head. Basically, this is obviously not intended for me because I have no conception of it at all.
It didn't spark an interest in you. You didn't see it and think, that looks like great fun. This is what's been missing from my life.
It sparked an academic interest in me, a sort of anthropological interest, which is kind of what we do with this podcast, right? This kind of the whole point is we look at something and try and understand what's going on. So from that point of view, yes, I had an interest in it. In terms of consuming it for enjoyment, I get nothing. I get a slightly weirded out reaction, but I certainly don't get any enjoyment from it.
Okay. But I think you've mentioned a couple of things there that when I was reading through a bit of the history, the background, and some of the kind of overall summaries of the identity of drag queen rather than drag, which was at some point an offensive term in the past. But if we drop a definition that I found, which I think sums it up, it says, a drag queen is a performer, historically typically a cisgender man, who uses clothes, makeup, and exaggerated feminine mannerisms to portray a stylized, satirical, or glamorous female character for entertainment. They are often, but not exclusively, part of the LGBTQ plus community, utilizing drag for artistic expression, performance, or social commentary. So why I think that's maybe important to note is that it's not the same as trans. It's not the same as cross-dressing to experiment with your own identity or your own sexuality necessarily. It is bombastic and over the top deliberately.
I think that's exactly it. Drag queening is a performance, but being trans is an identity.
Mm-hmm. So when you look up the history of drag, the etymology of the word is apparently from the 16th century. In theatre, when men would dress as women, when men would wear long dresses for the costumes to play female roles, and these dragged on the floor, apparently. So we're talking Shakespearean period. This is when theatre was closely tied to the church, and there were rules that only men could be actors, which is why they were playing the female roles. And that little knowledge bite comes to us from BBC Bite Size.
I love that the church, in its mission to oppress women, accidentally empowered the gay communities later on in life.
Or gave an identity to a marginalized group they didn't know existed or something.
Yeah, if they did know, I'm sure that would have got oppressed as well. Well, it did later. So that's the origin of the term drag, but drag queen, I did some digging on the queen part of it, and that's been quite interesting.
Okay. Interest us.
It probably goes back to a chap called William Dorsey Swan, who we'll talk about more in a little bit. But he was a prominent drag queen in the late 1800s in New York. He was a gay man that liked to dress in women's clothes, drag queening as we know it now. He referred to himself as the Queen of Drag and was known in his community as the Queen. So referring to himself as the Queen of Drag is kind of a pun. So one, he's saying, I'm at the top of this game, I'm the royalty, I'm the most fabulous. But the other one is queen was a term for a homosexual man, a derogatory term. Now, where does that come from? So it's not just a mangling of the word queer or simply saying this person is a woman, like a queen. It actually came from Cockney rhyming slang, believe it or not.
Okay.
From the term Queen Mary, fairy, because fairy was also a derogatory term for...
it's just layer and layer of slur on top of each other.
It's slurception all the way down. So yeah, and fairy was a derogatory term for effeminate or homosexual men. And that one actually does make sense. That's like fairies from folklore. So dainty, feminine, and, not butch and masculine.
I think that if we want to go into etymology of homosexual slurs, bender would be one as well, because you are bent and therefore not from straight being normal and homosexual not being normal. I think that can be traced back that way as well. There's a whole load which are just, how can we say something offensive? How can we take that offensive thing and put another layer on top of it?
As a species, we're incredibly good at this.
Being horrible to each other. Right. Good. So seemingly drag and drag queens got rolled together with the concept of gay men exploring different sides of themselves with exaggerated female costumes and mannerisms to create a persona in early performances. I think if we go to History of Drag from the StrothersLibraryTheatre.org, they are saying that drag queen, as you said, it's more of a 19th century persona phenomenon that came around from the LGBTQ community, and it dates back to drag balls, which were held in the 1860s, when they're sort of tracing it back its origin, maybe in the US more, like performances in the Hamilton Lodge in Harlem, when queer men would dress in these over-the-top feminine outfits and perform there with songs and musical numbers and sort of comedic routines and things.
And this was quite underground, wasn't it? Because it wasn't legal.
Yes.
So it was a tough time, because in the early days of this, slavery was still around, and after slavery, lots of racism and homophobia, and it was difficult being gay, it was difficult being black, and God help you if you were gay and black, you really had a tough time, because you were rejected by pretty much everyone, apart from other people in your position.
And it says that some of these early drag balls were exactly that. It was like an underground resistance against the socio norms at the time, when you could be literally arrested and thrown in prison for attending one of these things, because not only was homosexuality and homosexual acts illegal in the US for some of that time, up until the 1950s, 1960s, but they would also see it as, what they call them, molly houses. That's what they would call.
That's the British version.
Known gay bars would be called molly houses, and people would regularly be arrested there for solicitation, because they were like, okay, they're going there to pick up other men and pay them for sex. So you could be charged with being a homosexual and picking up prostitutes just for having gone to a bar to watch a drag show, for example.
And this gave rise to a sub-language, kind of like the gay version of Cockney rhyming slang, which was Polari, which I'd never heard of before. And there's a couple of Polari words that have made it into the common lexicon. In fact, actually...
A secret language born out of the criminalization of the LGBT plus community in England.
That was straight off Wikipedia?
No, that was straight out of that same article, StrothersLibraryTheatre.org blog, The Art and History of Drag.
So, words from this subversive coded language that we use now. Naff. Something's naff, it's rubbish. It actually comes from an acronym, supposedly, not available for fashion. Something was so bad it couldn't be used for fashion.
I would not have guessed that was coming from a secret gay language, because it was quite old-fashioned even when we were in school to say something was naff, but it was like a safe word of saying rubbish. It's like you weren't swearing if you said something was naff.
Something I've learned from doing this is how much influence gay culture has had on mainstream culture that I was never aware of. That's been interesting. So other ones, ogling, to look at or stare, usually with desire.
Ogling. Which one is it?
Ogling. I'd say ogle.
Potato.
Mince. Look at him mincing down the street to walk effectively with short steps.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. I've heard homosexuals be referred to as mincers.
Yeah. Zhuzhing up something to smarten up or style or improve. Yeah, loads of things. Slap, referring to makeup as slap.
Mm-hmm. Heard that. That's quite northern, I think. Sounds to me like something you'd get from someone in Newcastle, would say.
Yeah, loads of stuff.
Okay.
And these molly houses, I looked into why the term molly was used because I was...
you looked into them, did you? Just for experimentation, just for research, I've visited a handful or 20.
Picked up a few venereal disease, purely for academic reasons, of course. So molly houses, molly is a affectionate term for Mary, and molly was slang for a prostitute or slattern or other kind of wench. And it was used, again, as a homophobic slur to call people mollies. And then the gays decided to reclaim that and started calling themselves mollies. And then there'd be these molly houses, which were queer-friendly places. And they needed this language because they would get raided by the police.
Mm. I've heard older British men call someone a bit of a Mary before as well. I didn't know. I thought it was being effeminate. I wouldn't have necessarily said that they were calling me a gay. So I thought that in a way that we could maybe see this as having similarities to furries. Yet again, furries keep coming up. Since we talked about it, we've opened the box. I can't get
They're the master subculture.
In that it kind of lets people wear a costume and explore a character, and maybe through a sense of detachment and otherness from their everyday identity, because it's so over the top, they can maybe feel more comfortable in expressing their feelings or an exaggerated version of their feelings with an empowerment that comes from detachment and a sense of anonymity. However, I think that is maybe perhaps kind of the origin, but it's not really where drag queen is now. These people are certainly creating a performative persona, but I don't think that that's necessarily an exploration of their own identity. As we said, it's not trans. There was something I read from the Liverpool Echo, of all places, and I think that was where it called out that a lot of
Echo.
The Liverpool Echo. What a word to use when you can't even pronounce the middle syllable without spitting. Echo. Lovely place, lovely people.
I do like Liverpool, actually. I thought I wouldn't.
It's because you're a fucking skank.
It's got life. I rate places with life. Sorry, you're making quite a good point. Liverpool Echo.
You've cut me off
something
midstream of consciousness, and we'll never catch that sort of fleeting butterfly of thought again. I think I was saying that article was saying that drag performers are often very subdued and they're not seeking attention in their real life. They only have that through the character, but that's not necessarily exploring a side of them. It's more like something you can take out and put away again.
I think it might be still exploring a side of them. I think it's used as perhaps a way to express parts of yourself, parts of your genuine identity, but the drag thing itself is not an identity that you can inhabit permanently. It has to be a performance, and then you put it back in the box when you're done. Kind of like a
fursuit for furries.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, basically similar. But there is emphasis on exaggerating the feminine aesthetic to extremes, which seems to be interesting to the gay men that do it. I'm not sure why exactly it's feminine aesthetics to extremes or what the appeal is.
That I didn't really find a solid answer for that either. Why is it women were exaggerating? But
the best I could come up with was that exaggerating masculine stuff is not as funny. It's not as fun. It's mostly just a bit scary.
Or that's how society's currently built, with exaggerated masculinity and people that are doing performative masculinity almost on a daily basis. If you think of a stereotypical builder's site and workman's catcalling, that's already an over-the-top exaggeration, and no one wants to take that even more extreme, do they?
This reminds me actually of a RuPaul quote where he says, "Everyone's born naked, the rest is drag." And the point he's making is we're all performing our identities, we're all performing something the entire time. Even if that is just presenting as a normal person, you've still made choices to do that.
Presenting as a normal person. I don't really feel like I'm putting on a costume and performing when I just act as myself.
Well, it's interesting how you say act as yourself. It's an interesting choice of word, isn't it?
I'm using the vernacular that you've taken on, but to perform an act doesn't necessarily imply doing something for an audience. Anything is an action. Moving your hand, getting out of bed is an action.
It's true. But you might not be performing something in a conscious way, and it might not be an act in the sense that it's faked. but you are doing actions, and that presents something to the world, and you have choice in what you do in that.
I think now we're just getting lost in chasing our way through the dictionary, defining what words mean.
So let's talk about tucking.
Must we? Hold on. Actually, before we finish on the history, there is an interesting, so this is from nationalgeographic.com on one of their history sections, drag queen, drag balls, early history, pop culture. So they are also mentioning the drag balls that were held clandestinely in the 1860s onwards. And they are not eager, but they are right to point out that these were founded by Black and Latino performers largely, because there wasn't a mainstay for them to perform in costume as women. So if we look even slightly further back from a different article, like in the early 20th century, you had Julian Eltinge, who was a kind of ragtime performer. Variety show, okay. So variety shows would have men in not over-the-top dresses, but they might be men dressed as women that would do songs and dances and stuff that wasn't quite as over-the-top. But drag balls were deliberately provocative and exaggerated. That was because these communities didn't really feel that they had a place in mainstay entertainment. So not only were they kind of using gender and social stigma, or having to hide from those things, like hide social stigma and their gender, but it was also like a race play as well in the early starts of drag.
In the UK, these drag balls were sort of quite notorious affairs in the, I want to say, 1920s. And, you know, obviously it was still illegal to be openly homosexual then. And I wondered, how did they get away with this? Like these big organized, fabulous events. And basically, if it was framed as a performance and theatre and entertainment, then it was tolerated by the police. And that's how they got away with it.
I think that kind of lines up. Yeah.
So I'd quite like to briefly do the history of William Dorsey Swan, because he's not quite the history of drag, but he is a useful window into it, I think.
Now, what kind of years are we talking about for Mr. Swan here?
Mr. Swan. So he was born in 1860 on a plantation in Maryland, born into slavery. He was the fifth of 13 children, and after the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, his family remained in the area as farmers. By the 1880s, so in his 20s, Swan moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked as a janitor and waiter whilst building a secret social world. So Swan didn't just attend parties, he organised them. He formed what he called the House of Swan, a group of formerly enslaved men who gathered in private homes to dance, socialise and wear elaborate silk and satin dresses. And this name, House of Swan, and there's many other subsequent names later, House of Balenciaga, there's many of these. They were kind of named after fashion houses or high society houses. The one that was House of Balenciaga, for instance, has nothing to do directly with the Balenciaga fashion brand, but this guy renamed himself someone Balenciaga.
Boner Hyde Balenciaga.
And had this House of Balenciaga, and this was designed to take shots at the elite of society that had pushed them to the margins. And they're going to have their own versions of all this balls and glamour. So I don't know if he started that, but I think he was one of the early ones, if not the first person to do this. So he referred to himself as the Queen of Drag long before it became a standard term in pop culture. And as we've discussed, that's probably where the phrase comes from. And at these balls, they often performed the cakewalk, which was a dance originally created by enslaved people to mock the stiff, formal mannerisms of white plantation owners. White plantation owners. This is often cited as a spiritual ancestor to modern voguing. Voguing is a particular style of dance that is used to non-physically attack other queens, I believe.
I think, well, that was, of course, the Madonna hit song Vogue, and using elements of Vogue dance there. But I think that was also a mocking of white high society movements in dancing by exaggerating those movements as well. And it was well known in the gay community, not necessarily just in the drag community. And that's kind of what helped Madonna become a bit of a gay icon with Vogue.
It's an example of the mainstream mining marginalized culture for mass appeal.
It is. Where else did we come across that? There was something else we had exactly that. I mean, things like fashion are kind of related because it filters down, but...
Yes, exactly. It was fashion. In fact, there's quite a lot of crossover here. There's a really interesting relationship between fashion, which we know is dominated by gay men, and these ballroom houses, which is also predominantly gay men in drag. And there's this definite conflict between them. So why can't you all get along? And the it's not so much a sexuality divide. It's not a sexuality divide as such. I think it's more of a race divide and a wealth divide. So the fashion houses are sort of elite white European gays who are manufacturing fashion for elite white women predominantly. And then on the other side, you've got the marginalized, the poor, the often black or Hispanic drag queen side of things who are aping that culture in their own version of it. But the way it's kind of set up is pretty similar in the way the mainstream has mined street movements and things like that for fashion stuff. And I think there's quite a lot of crossover, and the mainstream culture has mined drag queen history for similar things.
You see something as edgy and raw and having come up organically from the streets, and you think, hey, we can cut the edges off that and polish it and then make it palatable for the rest of us.
With just enough edge left to make it feel like someone's getting the real deal, getting something authentic.
Manufactured edge,
yeah. Exactly that.
So did you actually want to talk about tucking, or can I give you a very dry academic paper to source from?
Oh, actually, there's more stuff for William Dorsey, but...
Sorry, please carry on.
Okay, so he wasn't just a queen. He was also a pioneer of LGBTQ plus rights because he was one of the first people to fight back, literally and legally, against the state. So the 1888 raid, on his 30th birthday, police raided one of his balls. Whilst others fled, Swan stood his ground. According to newspapers, he was, quote, arrayed in a gorgeous dress of cream-coloured satin and physically tried to block the police, telling the officer, "You is no gentleman." In 1896, Swan was falsely convicted of, quote, keeping a disorderly house, which was a euphemism for running a brothel. After being sentenced to 10 months in jail, which doesn't seem too bad, he did something unheard of. He petitioned President Grover Cleveland for a pardon. Though the pardon was denied, it remains the first documented instance of an American taking legal action to protect the right of the queer community to gather. So his final entry is, for over a century, Swan was largely forgotten. We only know his story today because of the work of journalist and historian Channing Gerard Joseph, who discovered Swan's name while digging through old police records and sensationalist newspaper articles from the 1880s. So a funny little inversion there. The police that tried to oppress him and silence him actually ended up being the most reliable record of his existence and exploits. So there's a neat little poetry there. And he eventually retired from the scene in the late 1890s, but his brother continued the tradition, making costumes for the DC drag community for nearly 50 more years. He truly laid the foundation for the house system we see in ballroom culture today.
Okay. I don't know. It's kind of crossing over to more of a trans identity thing rather than maybe they're not miles apart, but they have to be distinguished there because there's a performative element to drag. But then the gatherings and the parties and the houses are doing exactly that. It's performative, right?
Mm-hmm. And a safe place to exist. But within the drag queen culture, there's this sort of... these ballroom houses kind of functioned as refuges for marginalized people, black and gay and homeless, and they have matriarchs or patriarchs that they call themselves mother or father, kind of there to look after people and guide them. And it's this sort of chosen family thing, which is really quite wholesome, I think. But the drag queen side of it is they have these cakewalks, I guess, or walks. I think I have a feeling I'm butchering the terminology here, but this is the sort of performance element where it's kind of crossing modeling and drag queening, where they have different categories. They have these competitions. One, I think the most prestigious one is the realism category. So can you pass for a normal guy? Like executive real is a category where you dress up like a straight dude in a suit or a straight woman in a suit possibly, and try and pass yourself off as normal and as clean cut as you can be. And there's other more fantastical categories, but they compete with each other for status, I believe, from what I was reading. And part of this is roasting each other, except it's called shading or reading. And it's this sort of battle of wits. And I think that is a thing because the masculine thing to do is fight physically. And this is a rejection of that kind of masculine way of doing things, because masculine society has rejected these people for being gay. And so they do the ultra feminine way, which is to fight with words and destroy reputation. And it's this kind of like fencing that is part of this culture.
How is that any different from, sort of a rap battle or a, takedown session? It's nothing, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily opposing to masculine identities. If anything, it's just using them in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it isn't much different from a rap battle.
And it's not really embracing a kind of wholesome view. They're just people being horrible to each other.
Very catty, yeah, under the guise of, I'm not quite sure what.
Of wit.
Wit, I guess. Yeah, wit and poise.
One term that's quite interesting from, as I said, this somewhat dry article, but very well researched.
Dry me out.
Drag queens or female impersonators. There we go, that's a good term. Female impersonators differ from transsexuals and individuals with transvestic fetishisms, in that they are gay individuals who don female clothing with the explicit goal of performing in front of an audience. Yes. Drag queens explicitly distance themselves from individuals who use either hormones or undergo gender reassignment surgery. So we have to separate those two things. This is quite explicitly saying it. But the reason I thought you would like this is because it's from a proper medical paper. So this is from the National Library of Medicine under PubMed Central.
That sounds prestigious.
pmc.ncbi.nlm.nih.gov.
Wow, those are some impressive letters.
Evolutionary Psychology, this was published in. Now that's from 2017. But this is talking
What's
about...
the main thrust of the paper then?
This is an interesting paper because it talks about drag queen phenomenon not just being something for entertainment, but also aspects of drag's public appearance could be best understood in a signaling framework, i.e., it's not just about performance, it's just not just about entertainment, but it can be signaling your true virtues as a person through this persona. But there's a lot to unpack in this paper, very, very heavily referenced. It talks about some of the things that you mentioned, so that the fact that there's a lot of stigmatization early on, and drag was a way to, it kind of affords jobless, young and poor gays the opportunity to distinguish themselves from lower status individuals that they might have been previously. So if they get taken in by one of these houses, for example, it's an opportunity to have somewhere to go, but also potentially make a few pennies, which is appealing if you're completely marginalized and feel like there's nowhere in the world that you can be yourself.
I think it used to be a very political thing, politically important, a way to fight for rights and your own personal sense of status and belonging in a community. And I think in many ways they've won that fight. And now it's just more for just entertainment.
They've won that fight, and now they have won the right to force it down everyone's throats. This one sort of covers that as well. So saying that at the start of the fight for gay rights in the 1960s, which is when there was a lot more of a counterculture revolution, drag queens were kind of quite close to the forefront of that, with ostentatious parades and deliberately attracting the ire of passers-by, it says here. So there is this view somewhere further down the article. It kind of refers to drag queens as being militantly political at some point, as being on that front line. So it's like, we've taken this over-the-top persona to annoy you deliberately because we're making a point. Female impersonators aggressively joke about their masculinity, at times calling attention to their tucked-away penis, emphatically affirming that they are chicks with dicks. That's even got cited literature from it. Berkowitz D. and Belgrave L. in a 2007 publication.
Imagine writing that academic stuff. Amazing. Having to write tucked penis.
You can see their hands shaking on their quills as they did it.
So one of the political things that happened was the Stonewall uprising. Do you hear about this?
Rings a bell from history a long time ago, but I don't think so, not in this context.
So in 1969, homosexual acts were illegal in almost every US state. Bars that catered to gay people were frequently raided, and patrons were regularly harassed, beaten and arrested. So around 1:20 a.m., the police raided the Stonewall Inn, which I believe is in New York. Usually patrons would line up quietly, show ID and leave, but that night the crowd, which included many homeless queer youths, drag queens and trans women of colour, refused to cooperate. As police began to roughly haul patrons into vans, the crowd did not disperse. They began to jeer and then throw objects, mocking the police and eventually throwing stones, bottles and bricks. For the first time, the hunted became the hunted, and the police were forced to retreat and barricade themselves inside the Stonewall Inn, whilst the crowd tried to break in and get them. So then, or why this was important, there had been smaller riots before, such as Cooper Donuts in LA or Compton's Cafeteria in San Francisco. But Stonewall was different because it happened in the media capital of the world, which is New York City. It couldn't really be ignored. And the media coverage began spreading the news of gay power nationwide, somewhat inadvertently. Within weeks of the riots, activists had formed the Gay Liberation Front. They moved away from asking for permission to be accepted and toward demanding liberation. This is interesting. On the 1-year anniversary of the riots, June 1970, activists organised the Christopher Street Liberation Day March. They expected a few hundred people, but thousands showed up. And this was the first celebration of gay pride. This is what became Pride, which is now a fabulous celebration of gayness and all things fabulous. But it started out as a bloody riot fighting for rights. And I had no idea. I'd forgotten if I'd ever known.
You didn't know that's where Pride came from, or Pride parades?
No, I've been learning lots of stuff.
So getting into this, further down this article, where they go through the history of modern day Western drag, or Western drag queens, and where they get to signaling theory as an explanatory framework, they talk about signaling theory has a wide variety of kind of evolutionary, not prestige, it's well documented in evolutionary history. So other animals and tribes that will make shows of, I can hunt this thing because I'm the most dominant male. And that we use signals to communicate honest information about ourselves as humans, even though the act can potentially be over the top. So they talk about turtle hunters in a Miriam kind of tribal setting, because hunting turtles conveys information about their abilities, skill, and potentials to prospect mates, whereas it would be far easier just gathering and farming and things. But by hunting, you're showing off your prowess.
Yeah, which we value socially.
And they're saying that drag queen behavior fits into this because you are signaling parts of your personality to someone else in this extravagant way. So you're showing that you're a risk taker, you're willing to push boundaries, that you're willing to stand up for your right to be different and bombastic. And
you're showing confidence, and the drag queen performances include singing and comedy and witty roasting, right? So it's demonstrating lots of different skills.
And now they say this is potentially socially harmful, particularly in the past, because of the threat of punitive behavior in a legal sense, but then also the kind of violent backlash from your man on the street at some point. But if you see it as a form of not necessarily self-expression, but just signaling that you're not going anywhere, you're not going to back down, then it kind of, when we say why do people do it, that might be quite a convenient explanation, but it certainly has a lot more. I can understand that aspect of it more than I can that it's just, I want to be a funny clown. Although I think that the modern day interpretation of things like RuPaul's Drag Race is more akin to clownery than it is to having anything that you actually believe in or stand up for.
Yeah, it does operate in the same space as clowning somewhat, I think. Certainly now. It's entertainment.
Yeah, and it's gone from entertainment and art as a kind of street warfare into a commercialized and caricature of what it might have stood for in the past. And what it stood for in the past was making caricatures with a point.
And RuPaul is a key figure in this commercialization because he's come up from that community, but he's been able to translate it into modern, commercially packageable, digestible showbiz, and it's made him a very rich man indeed, or queen indeed.
But at the cost of others in the community, some would say.
What would they say?
Well, I don't know. Do you want to go into the dark sides of drag? We've actually been talking about this for longer than I thought.
Well, before we get into dark side, there's one more controversy I want to discuss. Did you come across Drag Queen Story Hour?
No, because I haven't ingested any of this is a form of entertainment. I don't know what that is.
You're going to love this.
I'm sure.
So Drag Queen Story Hour was an idea someone came up with in San Francisco, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, something like that, where they get drag queens to come to libraries to read stories to children between the ages of 3 and 11. How do you feel about that?
Why?
That was my first question. Why?
Why does it have to be drag queens?
Yeah.
But the whole point of a drag queen is this almost risque, over the top. The behaviors that I don't like, you can just seem to be embodied by drag queen personas. All this Yas Queen stuff, but that's the palatable side that people can have now. But it's like overt sexualization but not sexy, like the exaggerated form of it, and deliberately behaving in an inappropriate way is part of the caricature, and I think part of the whole style of drag. So why would you want to take someone who's being deliberately inappropriate to a bunch of children?
I think it's a good question, and the two main sides of this debate are, on one side, as you've said, what business does a drag queen have with kids? Even if they're not, child predators or something like that, drag is a clearly adult form of entertainment, and the fact that it's toned down for kids doesn't excuse it, because the fact you have to tone it down kind of proves the point that it is adult. And just what's it about? It's presented as this presented under the guise of, it's literature stuff for kids. But really what it's about is, hey, we want to educate people on gender identity and gender fluidity from a young age and get kids okay with that. And the pro argument is what I just said about, we want kids to be introduced to gender fluidity from a young age, and it's not sexual, it's all been toned down, and there's just characters or entertainers, the same as you might have someone dressed as a pirate reading children's stories for an hour at the library, or dressed as a princess or something like that. And it is harmless, and in fact it does good.
But I would have thought that the idea of drag is to be extrovert and over the top, whereas that's going to confuse children around gender identity rather than introduce them to gender fluidity, because the point of drag and the whole quote there of chicks with dicks, they often play up their masculine side while parodying feminine qualities. None of that is giving children a concrete idea about gender fluidity. It's very mixed signals and defeats the purpose of drag as a performance.
And it's gender taken to a complete extreme, like caricatures of women, whereas I think most trans people, I expect, wouldn't want to present themselves in the same way and would like to be a more normal version of masculinity or femininity.
Isn't the point of trans is that you identify as that other gender? So the ultimate goal is to not stand out as a caricature of the gender that you weren't born with, let's say.
I think for most people, yes, in my understanding.
I mean, I'm sure that the cancel culture zealots will be coming after us, be going, how is that any more or less confusing than having a giant purple dinosaur reading to children? Because Barney's nothing like what dinosaurs look like. That's going to give children the wrong impression of dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs don't even exist.
But the difference is they're not going to go out and try and have to date a dinosaur. They're going to have to date a human. And if you've messed up their idea of what any kind of gender role is, masculine, feminine, or otherwise, then what chance do these poor buggers have?
Yeah, I kind of wrestled with this back and forward, and I think it's difficult to... The line I would like to be walked is a difficult one to walk. So when my kids, if I ever have them, are young, I would like them to develop their own sense of identity and their own thoughts, even if they're rudimentary, about men and women and gender. And maybe when they're a bit older, introduce them, like maybe 11 might be the youngest. I would say they're capable of reasoning and understanding more complex things at that age. Then I might like to introduce the idea of, well, for some people it's not as simple as being born a man or being born a woman, and they feel they should present themselves in this way instead. And I think that's fine. I support people's right to do that. But I would like my kids to be able to interpret it from a solid, at least a reasonably solid grounding and sense of self, rather than, taking kids as young as 3 and 4 here. I know it's not politically popular to say, but I do think it's going to cause unnecessary confusion to those kids, or it might do. And I don't think they've got the cognitive framework to understand the nuance of it all. And
yeah, exactly. That's it.
Even if I did think that, I wouldn't want drag queens to be the ones doing it.
There is a piece from this natural history of drag that it even states up top that drag queens typically, and they did research from the drag community, the gay community, and the straight community, and they found that typically drag performers are of a lower educational background as well. They seem like the opposite people that you want to be trying to educate your kids. Can they even read?
But there's also data that says they are not paedophiles at any higher rate than the normal population, the general population. So the argument that they're child predators, I think, is not backed up by data.
Yeah, my mind didn't even really go there, which is funny because
it's unusual for the pedo finder general.
Exactly. But this actually plays into some of the stuff that crops up when you search for the dark side of drag queens, because I guess it focuses on the modern drag queen culture. And there are some feminist critics that view its hypersexualized characterization of womanhood that kind of reinforces unrealistic and damaging feminine ideals, which they're then bringing into these reading sessions of children who, as you said, don't have the cognitive framework to go, okay, I've kind of got my head around boys and girls, but this is more than that, less than that, or over-the-top versions of it. And the other thing that comes up again in that sort of cultural tension space on one of the darker sides is it's what you were saying before, really, the kind of shade and reading, using the community terms, not as in reading to children. While they're traditional comedic elements, they are often pressured to be even more underhanded and catty and vulgar with each other. But so you're bringing someone who's kind of honed that skill into a children's library. God forbid the 5-year-old heckles them or asks why they've got a beard.
They get absolutely eviscerated.
Just get destroyed, yeah.
Funny though that would be, to see little Timmy getting owned for no reason. In order for drag queens to be palatable for this, they've got to pretty much eliminate everything that makes them distinctive in order to be toned down enough to be able to read a story to some kids without, which brings us back to your original point of why drag queens. I think it's someone's mad idea that the progressive activists like, because it's weird and new and gay and makes people uncomfortable, and it's gathered some pace because of that. But I think it's on very shaky ground. I don't necessarily think it's evil or sinister. I just think it's ill-advised, and what I don't like about it is it presents itself as of literary benefit to children, but its real purpose is promoting gender fluidity education. If it was presented as that,
it's got a political agenda wrapped up
in
trying to be an innocent children scene.
Yes, yeah. I've heard the argument made that it's not a political agenda; it's a human agenda to want rights and education around this kind of stuff. Like it or not, it's still political.
It's gender politics rather than, I don't know, national politics, let's say.
Yeah, I do see the argument that it's more than just politics. It's about real human concerns, whereas politics is more of a debate over what's right. And there's certain things that ought to just be rights, I guess is I guess that's the thrust of what many people are trying to do is make it not a debate. It's just a right.
I think it's just popularized by this forced acceptance, like, oh, why can't it be drag queens? If we are saying why drag queens, the argument is, well, why not? Why shouldn't it be?
Are you homophobic?
Exactly.
Are you misogynistic?
What's wrong with teaching kids about gays? They should be able to watch man-on-man oral sex from the age of 3. Why not?
Yeah. This is something I came across as well. There are several parts of this that of the whole gay rights and gender fluidity and trans rights and all this sort of stuff, and how it's part of the mainstream. There's several things that I agree with on principle and I support, but not very enthusiastically. Like I don't have to like every part of this.
No, you don't.
I can still support something without being massively enthusiastic about it. And I feel that really tries to eviscerate people that aren't enthusiastic about stuff. They equate your lack of enthusiasm with hate for it. And it's just not the case.
You can be accepting of something, or basically be, what's the word?
Agnostic?
Yeah, you can be completely agnostic towards this. Like, right, if you want to do that, that's fine. But just not want everything forced in your face. Like, I don't want incredibly graphic feminist readings in my, I don't know, over breakfast or at my children's reading groups. I don't really want them to have the vagina monologues at the age of 5 either. Not that I've got kids or it's any of my problem. Again, I'm agnostic, so I don't really give a shit. But by not really caring about it, as you say, you're seen as
anti it,
as an enemy, rather than an ally.
Yeah, I think that kind of stuff. The example you gave, great. Glad it exists somewhere. Doesn't have to be in front of me.
Yeah.
Going back to something you said about feminists saying it's a mockery of women and femininity, and adds to unrealistic expectations. I can see the point, but I would say it's a satire of femininity, and if anything, it actually takes things to such absurd extremes that it highlights how absurd the starting material was in a way. Like, oh, is this really what society is saying that the ideal woman should be? And when you've got giant hips and giant tits and a face full of makeup that looks like you've been shot by that makeup gun from The Simpsons. No, I mean, drag's popular among straight women. as audience members. And I think it pokes fun or holds a mirror up to society's expectations of women. And I think it probably actually does favours to women as a whole as a result.
So some of that I disagree with. And
how dare you?
There are many Reddit feminism posts that are going down that line as well. But one that was a bit more of a well-written and explained way of looking at this, and this is what I kind of wanted to mention at the start that actually aligns with some of my views, is from feministcurrent.com, although it was written in 2014. And the post is, "Why has drag escaped critique from feminists and the LGBTQ community?" It's quite long. It's more of a questioning article. It's not saying, I really hate this, I'm against this and stuff. But the writer kind of asks, why are we being told to accept this under the guise of performance or satire, and just say, oh, it's cute, it's funny, it's for the entertainment of usually white men, not always, but kind of mocking.
No, how did we get dragged into this? We had nothing to do with this.
Shush. No, it's good. It's got good points. But this is almost like cultural appropriation, saying that why do we suddenly accept that men can dress up as women and mock them, even if you say it's stereotypes and stuff. And the really, kind of controversial question here is, why is drag any more accepted than blackface is not accepted, right? So in blackface, it's a white person putting on blackface paint makeup, exaggerating the features, or what would have been, called the typical features, because it's a way old tradition, of gollywogs and huge red lips and giant bulging eyes and stuff, all the terrible stuff that was in the minstrel shows back in the day, which drag queens performed alongside historically. That's not acceptable. That is racist, to be taking the piss out of another ethnicity by saying, hey, look, they all look like this. But yet drag is doing the same thing, and it's just for comic effect. Because it's kind of tied to the counterculture and LGBTQ rights, I think people are sort of forced to accept that it's there, when actually there are people that are equally put off or offended by what drag is, especially nowadays when the RuPaul stuff is not about sexual equality or human rights. It is just kind of mockery.
It's reality TV spectacle.
Who can look the silliest and act the most outrageous? If you or I were doing that in blackface and saying which one of us can make the most outrageous impersonation, God, not only on the internet, but we'd be literally strung up, I think.
I definitely see what you're saying, and I understand the point that...
It's not necessarily what I'm saying, but it's what...
Sorry.
That's what Meghan Murphy is saying, or at least asking the question of.
I understand what Meghan Murphy's saying. I think she's saying, why does this get a free pass? Okay, yes, it came out of a gay rights movement. Does that apparently shield it from all criticism? But I would disagree that it's a mockery of feminism. I think this is the difference between drag and blackface. Sorry, a mockery of women. I think this is the difference between drag and blackface. Drag, I think, is a satire of society's expectations of women and femininity, whereas blackface is a mockery of black people. That's what it was intended as the beginning. So for me, that's a key difference. I would hazard a guess that drag queens are empathetic with women and women's rights and women's issues, and that's incorporated into their performances. And the stresses and demands of being fabulous but not too much, and all this kind of...
I don't think it... Well, I've spoken to a couple of women who were like, oh, yeah, it's quite funny, I don't mind it, or they, the mannerisms are funny to me, and others who are vehemently opposed to it because they see it as, you can't just put on a sparkly dress and a wig and say that you understand what it's like to be a woman. Of course you can't. And this is the kind of thing that J.K. Rowling, that Harry Potter author, was crucified online for saying as well, that trans women aren't women, which is a whole different debate.
Do you want to touch that one whilst we're here?
God, no. As we said, drag queens is not the same as trans women, but I think the mockery and the satire, it's far removed from being having any kind of protest rights. They've given up they've sold their heritage to come and play on RuPaul's Drag Race.
RuPaul sold their collective soul.
Yeah, something like that. But this is, so if we're going kind of on the darker side, but that's the exploitation and commercialization of it now, which usually traces back to RuPaul's Drag Race, has created a lot of kind of economic and cultural friction for them, because it's not only it's not a protest movement anymore. It's a comic parody thing that you get on Saturday night TV or something like that. But it's also then split off those that will go on the show or have been on the show, and they say creating an elite class of queens. So the performers who have appeared on the TV are willing to go on these kind of reality shows and basically make fools of themselves, because that's what it's come down to. You know, races in high heels and stuff like that. They are demeaning themselves for the entertainment value, therefore kind of tarnishes the low-level performers who are never going to make that kind of money and are doing it for the, you know, genuine talent and entertainment in the grassroots kind of.
And if done right, it should be empowering rather than demeaning.
But it doesn't seem like that's the point of the mainstream stuff now.
Well,
then they've also sort of mentioned the low pay and poor working conditions side of things, where performers have this sort of revolving, or the casting and directing of it have this open door policy, like, well, we can treat you like crap. We're not going to give you anything good for going on the show because I've got another 50 of you lined up around the block who want the potential fame and stardom of being on this show. But that's reality TV in general, not necessarily just this one, but it's become part of that scene.
I think it's worth mentioning that RuPaul's Drag Race is how the mainstream consumes drag by and large, and how our opinions are shaped. But it is not the sum total of drag queen culture. It is simply the mainstream visible part of it. And the majority of drag queen culture is still happening away from that in local bars and things like that.
But that's why I said up top that it's deliberately provocative and shocking, but its time in the spotlight might have done more damage to its own roots in the gay community than it has, you know, helped it by putting it in the mainstream, because that's how people see it now. They only see this, you know, satirized version, if you like.
It's crass entertainment with desperate people on reality TV.
It is, and crass entertainers is kind of where my preconceptions and prejudices come from, in that I said I don't like it, I don't like the way they conduct themselves, I don't like the whole scene, and that's shaped by, even having not watched the show, that was my understanding of it going into this.
Another argument I'd make against it being a mockery of women is I think the main demographic of audience member is straight women. So they're either being mocked and they don't realise it, or they don't feel mocked and they like it for some reason.
I don't think it really excuses it or changes the point of that feminist article, let's say, in my view. But mine is a limited lens through which to view the world.
Did you say it was primarily for the consumption of white men?
No, primarily performed by white men.
Okay. We're still to blame. At least it's not white straight men. We're safe, Andy. I feel like we've dodged the bullet there.
They're coming for you, gays.
It's not us for once.
To me, it seems to cultural appropriation of the way in which white people have mocked black people. Yeah, she gets this cultural appropriation, that's the term, where it's like, oh, look, the white men get to put on another costume and parade around and make fun of another group, just like they did with the blacks at some point.
I bet she'd have no problem with women dressing up as men and mocking them. She probably supports it.
What, drag kings? They're also seemingly marginalized by the commercialization of RuPaul's Drag Race. So they're seen as kind of, although it spun off much later than drag queens, but drag kings are sort of a bit more.
I think it's significantly rarer and it's inherently less portable to entertainment.
And then RuPaul himself, since 2018, in this interview with The Guardian, stated that he wouldn't admit trans women on the show, doesn't want any...
I was going to say, that's interesting.
Any performers down that line. They had the segment titled "You've Got She-Male," apparently, which plays on a transphobic slurs. So RuPaul, she-male, again, continuing to damage the community that, raised him up.
Well, yeah, that's true. Drag is, as we've said, not a trans thing necessarily. It's a gay thing. Although I guess you can be trans and do it, but...
Well, no, not on that show you can't.
But not on RuPaul, that's what he's saying. You have to be a man presenting as a woman. You can't be a trans woman and do it, I think he was saying.
Something like that.
Is he fine with trans men doing it? Probably not either.
Don't know.
See, he's a sort of traditionalist in that sense, but I think he's since retracted that because obviously it was politically unpalatable and he's clearly interested in the dollars.
Yep. Speaking of which, he's also had a lot of environmental backlash and ethical backlash because he allowed fracking on his huge Wyoming ranch.
Dollar bills, yo.
They've got a section apparently which has got like climate change themed challenges, while the host is profiting off of practices that are linked to groundwater contamination and climate change itself.
Beautiful. There you go. There's some dark side.
Yeah.
Corrupt.
But that's, the reality show-ization of drag.
Yeah.
Has brought with it all the toxic sides of anything being in the limelight, and the people making money want to keep making money, and corruption and lack of morals are rife.
He's just the corporate avatar of the drag movement.
Somehow palatable to the masses.
I asked my girlfriend, because she likes RuPaul's Drag Race, if she had any interesting factoids. She's got 2 particularly good ones. Fun drag queen facts. Ursula from Disney's Ariel was based on a famous drag queen called Divine.
Yeah. I thought it might have been based on my friend's mum, because she looks a lot like Ursula. She's a fucking horrific looking woman.
Yeah. An absolute gargoyle.
She really is.
And the other thing that was really good, she said, so your tuck is like tucking the penis away, often taping it down. A meaty tuck is an inexpertly done one, or a peen that is just too chunky, perhaps. Oh, that's a meaty tuck, that is. Look at that. What? Why are you erect? Put that away. Tuck that away, Andrew.
I refuse. I've got a right, and you have to like it, because I said so.
And be enthusiastic about it. So, does that bring us to our favourite question of all? Have you prepared?
Is it sexual?
Is it?
Is it sexual? I think that's an interesting one, because it's sexuality taken to such extremes that it's actually couldn't possibly be sexy any longer. It's like these video game characters where you can just keep increasing their features until they look like grotesque little parodies.
Homunculi.
Yeah, exactly. It's done the same thing with sexuality. That's kind of the point. It's gone so extreme that it couldn't possibly be sexual. So it's the shape of sexuality. It's like got all this sexual imagery, but no one performing it is getting any sexual gratification from it. And no one viewing it is getting any sexual gratification from it, I believe.
I think that while it's in a sexual packaging, or it might be seen that way from outsiders, and especially when we look back at the history and the fact that they were performed in molly houses and were charged with soliciting and things like that early on, actual drag queen culture I don't think is in any way sexual, because as gay men performing it, that's not what they're attracted to. It's not what other gay men that they're interested in are attracted to. As straight women,
they're not attracted to it.
No, they know it's male performers, but it's not something they're attracted to. Like, there's nothing, I don't know, it's like putting the wrong ends of magnets together, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No one's getting sexual gratification from it, although the packaging is tied up to sexualization.
Trust me, I've tried. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's a tough wank.
Challenging wank.
One of the more negative sides of things, this article from the Liverpool Echo also talked about at a local level, and I can't imagine many things rougher than being a local performer of drag in Liverpool.
Jesus, I know.
I mean, it's got a bit of a rough reputation. You said it's a lively city. That's a nice way of putting it. But yeah, it's not known for its artists and scholars and their scholarly approach to things. It's dive pubs and stuff like that. But I'm getting off topic. They were saying that every act that they do or go to has some form of inappropriate touching, usually from men. They're like, oi, where have you tucked that? Hands up the dresses, groping the fake boobs, that kind of thing. Sexualizing the performer, even though it's not a sexy thing.
So that is male straight audience members performing excessive masculinity, you could say.
They might even be trying to overcompensate and make a mockery of the fact that they probably were a little bit turned on. Even though they know it's a man, they've been told it's a man, and they've got an uncomfortable erection that they're trying to process, so they just try and...
I'm going to go super macho.
They try and macho their way out of
Grabby.
it. Yeah. Bust out grabby and squeezy.
I've got to say, if I wanted to get into drag... Oh, next question, would you be into this?
It's a hard no from me.
Hard no. What's hard?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Fully tuckable.
It's also a no for me. Although that said, I did.
You were just contemplating it. Like, is it something you'd be into? And you're like, well, if I was going to get completely volunteer that information, no problem.
I mean, I've already done it.
Dressing up to a Halloween party is not necessarily the same as drag, is it? Well, maybe.
There was a year 6, so age 11, a talent show, and at the end of the residential trip away, and me and my 5 friends all dressed up as women, and we did a performance of 5's. I can't remember what it was. Some song anyway.
Some boy band song.
Yeah,
dressed as women.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess technically I've sort of done it. That was fun. I have no idea how we came up with that idea, but it was fun. Everyone loved it, and it felt pretty harmless. And it didn't give me any confusing ideas about gender identity at all. So that's interesting. I probably should have led with this.
It's only just resurfacing now.
Yeah.
It's a repressed memory.
Yeah, it was fun.
Sleeper agent drag performer.
And I've dressed up as a woman on Halloween another time later, and that was fun as well. It was fun.
But what was fun about it is that
I actually quite enjoyed overperforming.
Exactly, it's the
flirtiness.
Character. Yep, there you go. So it's the over the top nature that is part of the drag persona. I think yours was closer to a mockery of feminism.
Which one?
All of it.
Yeah, when I was 11, I hadn't even heard the word feminism. I had very few thoughts in my head when I was 11. One of my so-called friends yanked down my skirt at the end of the performance. I was standing on stage in my Y-fronts. That was humiliating. Didn't enjoy that part of it.
Exposed your tuck.
Meaty. Yeah, he was a twat, actually, that guy. Fuck that guy.
So has your opinion of this changed after doing a bit more of the reading, a bit more of the research?
So I wasn't against it to start with. I was just baffled. Despite having done it, weird, I managed to do that completely ignorantly. Has my opinion changed? I feel like I understand it better, but really what I've learned is how much influence gay culture has had on mainstream culture. There's all kinds of words that we use day to day that have come from that. And I had no idea drag had origins in gay rights movements. And I'd never heard of ballroom houses. And they still operate today. And it's astonishing. I can't believe I don't know more about it. So, yeah, I think I've got a greater appreciation for its social and political importance, much more in the past, I suppose, than now. But am I any really much closer to understanding why some gay men feel driven to do it and what they get out of it? A little bit, but I wouldn't say I really feel like I understand it.
Okay.
What about you? Have you mollified your opinions slightly?
I understand a bit more that the caricatures are deliberate and the history is more extensive than I thought. As you said, I didn't know it was tied to gay rights and protests. But the way that it is now and the way that, let's say, the majority of the mainstream drag is and the personas that come out of it that we're now exposed to, I still don't see these as traits that should be celebrated. It's more the behavior of things that I'm against rather than anything that it might stand for, because I would separate it. I would separate drag queen and the personas of drag queens from their place in a counterculture revolution. But I understand that my views come from a straight, white, cisgender perspective, and that ultimately I can't necessarily understand the nuance and appeal of drag as a performative art, and that even amongst my peers, like yourself, like your girlfriend that consumes it, like some of the people I spoke to at work, it's not necessarily a popular opinion or a shared opinion that I have to be so against it, but something I do not like it. There's something I find inherently wrong about the way that the people conduct themselves. And as I said, people that I know of just sort of find it funny and they don't really take it as any more than entertainment, but something about it really, really bugs me. If anything, I found that article from the feminist site resonated and kind of put into words some of the views that I had most out of the stuff that I read. And in its kind of, I wouldn't go as far as to say that I would compare it to blackface and minstrel shows, but I do see it as a sort of, or the way that we see it 90% of the time, as a kind of grotesque mockery. But I understand that that's my opinion. It's the lens that I view it through. And it's also fine that it's not for me, and it's not particularly for me either. They're not doing it for my yes or no.
That's fair. I think that's a very reasonable view.
You thought it was going to be much more screamy.
Yeah.
Fucking gays in their fucking glittery dresses.
Fucking shoving it right in your face. Oh, it's fucking horrible. It's wrong. It's wrong, that is.
It's fucking horrible how much of an erection you've given me, you dirty homo.
Yeah, interesting. There's been so much to work through. It's been quite difficult just to try and wrap my head around the sheer scale of the history involved.
I think that the part that I not struggled with, but the part that I wanted to differentiate is that the drag queen persona and the drag king culture that we see now, we don't necessarily have to see the modern version as tied to gay rights, and it doesn't mean you should accept something just because it has a heritage.
Progressive heritage.
Yeah.
Smash that subscribe button.
Don't even have a clever segue for you.
Don't you?
That's how at odds this has been with my own opinions, but you can engage with us socially and report us to the cancel police through our social context. You can find us on X at Sub-Subculture, Instagram at Sub-Subculture Podcast, and our Reddit page are Sub-Subculture Podcast. And I would challenge our audience to send us a picture of their draggiest drag costumes on any of those platforms, and we'll give you a thumbs up for it, just for sharing.
And pictures of your meatiest tuck.
No, I don't want that. No. And just to clarify, the thumbs up will purely be on the social account. There'll be no inappropriate touching of your costume.
Wow, that's forward thinking.
Oh yeah, I'm so progressive, in not wanting to grope other people in public.
Wait,
yeah.
Yeah.
Leave us your comments, leave us your hate mail. Suggest topics for us in future that you want us to butcher, and we might cover them and say, hey, that person said to do this thing.
Use a blue waffle hammer, said. Pop go waffle hammer.
I just got through editing that. Yeah, that really tickled you.
It really did. Yeah. It still tickles me. Pleasure as always, Andrew.
It's been my pleasure trying to unpack this with you and learning a little bit more about my secretly cross-dressing when he was 11 co-host.
Yeah, I don't know where that surfaced from.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Well, time to push that back down.
And thank you to our listeners for enduring this stumbling view into our own psyches. What we got next time?
Well, what are we doing next time? Great question.
That one, were fucking great. Hollow Earth, that's what's next.
Hollow Earth. I don't think this is going to be a full subculture.
You don't like it. You don't like the idea of it as a topic. You think, oh, well, it's just a bit of silliness. I'll show you.
All right.
Hour and a half of drag queens. I'll fucking fill you with Hollow Earth.
Wait, can you do that? Topologically? This I must see, and hopefully not feel.
So join us next time for the hollowest of Hollow Earths. But for now,
let's wrap this up.
Thank you.